Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. The ongoing fighting in Yemen has exposed both the alliances that exist between the Saudi-led Sunni alliance amongst the Arab countries and the emerging role of Iran in the geopolitics of the Arab world. But it has also shown the important role that India can continue to play in the Arab world with the rescue operations that have been successfully led and spearheaded by the Indian government.
The ongoing fighting in Yemen between the forces of its Saudi-backed President Hadi and the Iran-backed Shiite Houthi rebels is the latest in the series of sectarian conflicts that has kept the Islamic nations of the Arab world on edge for several years now. With the Houthis having hounded out President Hadi and his dysfunctional regime, the irony of Saudi Arabia having cobbled together an alliance of 7 monarchies to restore democracy in Yemen is not lost on observers. Nor is the fact that elsewhere in the Arab world, the backing of Sunni militias by Saudi Arabia and Qatar in Syria has led to the rise of ISIS, that is now facing reverses against the Iran-backed Iraqi army. And in all this, it is the innocents that are caught in the crossfire. Like the thousands of Indians working in Yemen who were evacuated this week by the Indian government, along with citizens of over 26 countries. 11 Indians also came out on a Pakistani ship. But the dilemma for Pakistan's government is a bigger one. The Saudis now want them to do more than rescue their own citizens. Having bankrolled several Pakistani regimes, Riyadh is now asking for payback, wanting Pakistan to send troops and join the conflict in Yemen. But the Pakistan army is already stretched, fighting America's enemies and its own demons like the Taliban. And by fighting for the Saudis against the Iran-backed Houthi rebels, Pakistan would only add to its already volatile internal Shia-Sunni divide.
To discuss the events in the Arab world and its implications both for international politics and for India, we have with us Mr. Talmiz Ahmed, who's been India's ambassador to Saudi Arabia twice and ambassador to Oman and the UAE. And also with us is Mr. Awad, who is currently the South Asia Bureau Chief of Sana'a. Mr. Ahmed, do you feel that what is evolving in Yemen in many ways reflects a kind of obverse of a situation that has been prevalent in Iraq and further in Syria for the last several years? And clearly, the sectarian politics and the line being pushed by some of the major powers in the Arab world is causing the kind of instability which was unforeseen several years ago by many analysts.
The principal point to be noted is there is now a breakdown in the balance of power in the region. It began with the American invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the empowerment of a Shia authority in that country. This is since then, many other developments have taken place across the region, particularly after the Arab Spring. They have all given Saudi Arabia the impression that it is increasingly at a strategic disadvantage vis-a-vis Iran. This is specifically the fall of the Mubarak regime in 2011, and after that, the massive reform movement in Bahrain. Saudi Arabia now sees itself facing an existential threat from across the Gulf. And this threat is articulated in strategic terms as well as in sectarian terms. It is principally a strategic divide, and it's a strategic concern, but onto this, artificially, a sectarian veneer has been provided.
Mr. Awad, while in Yemen, it is the Sunni-led coalition of the Saudis that is trying to get Yemen back into its fold, supported, some say, by Iranian-trained rebels. But in Syria, your country of origin, there is clearly a battleground between various Arab powers and the big powers such as the United States, Russia, and the European Union. How do you see the events panning out in Syria? I've seen a kind of status quo prevailing there for some years, and I don't see much emerging out of all the bombing that's taking place.
I think General Wensley, the United States leader of the NATO in 2007, made it very clear that the United States wanted to topple 7 regimes in the Arab world, including Syria, Yemen, Libya, Iran, and also Egypt and Tunisia. And these are part of the American policy in the region, regime change. And if you look at what is going on in my country, in Syria or in Iraq, it is just part of the same agenda that they have set up. The proxy war, which was Saudis leading it, it's not the Sunni as such as in the picture. It is just the lead of the greedy countries which have been enjoying the money of the Saudis and the Qataris, and the Turkey on one side, along with these countries, are leading the war against Syria and against Iraq. And IS is just their own creation. Therefore, Syrian situation is being an installment because of the total destruction of the Syrian is not being completed yet by them. And they have come to a stage realize that the danger of IS has become more into them rather than the region. So therefore, they wanted the cooperation of the Syrian government now to talk in terms of fighting the IS together and not a regime change. I think the Saudis feel that they are unable to topple this regime. They are unable to topple any other regimes in the Arab world like they have done in Libya, which with their own money. Now they are trying it in Yemen, which is a part of the US policy in the region. And I think that is going to be a trap for the Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is writing their death trap inside Yemen, because Yemen, as the Saudis always say, it will be either the goodwill or the badwill will come to against the existential of Saudi Arabia rather than from Iran. So to give it
2 points. One is Saudi Arabia is coming up again and again in this conversation. Clearly, it's a big player. 2 issues about the Saudis. One is, to what extent have they influenced events in Syria, Iraq, elsewhere, and the kind of philosophical or other support has led to the creation of ISIS? And more importantly, how is the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan going to pan out, with Pakistan now dragging its feet to provide the physical support that is their paymasters over the years, the government in Riyadh is expecting them to deliver on?
Saudi Arabia felt that a regime change in Syria would to some extent redress the balance of power in the region that I mentioned a short while ago. Initially, it supported the quote-unquote secular Free Syrian Army, while Qatar and Turkey were backing the Salafi militia. With the failure of the Free Syrian Army to be effective for the last year or so, Saudi Arabia has taken control of the Salafi militia. To this extent, they have played a role. But we must also recall that Bashar Assad, right at the beginning of the conflict, also mobilized support for himself on the basis of his foundational support base, and that is the Alawi community. So there was a certain sectarian divide that came into play fairly early in the Syrian, in the Syrian imbroglio. Similarly, you see in the case of Yemen, the Houthis is an entirely domestic phenomenon. I think the extent of Iranian influence upon them has been grossly exaggerated. Certainly, they have been active in Yemen since 2004, and there has been no evidence of active Iranian support to them. They have fought 6 armies against Ali Abdullah Saleh. Also, this constant reference to Shia and Sunni is not helpful. Ali Abdullah Saleh, who ruled the country for nearly 40 years, was actually Shia Zaidi.
What is interesting that has emerged in both your views, and there is a consistency, that the sectarian divide has been played up too much. And quite clearly that it is not so much as the Shia-Sunni divide as the game that big powers like the United States are wanting to play in the Arab world, and the unfortunate recipients at the end of it are the people on the ground who are caught up in the crossfire. We'll be back after a break to look at the implications of the ongoing instability in the Arab world on India. Welcome back. One of the points that was made in the earlier part of the debate, Mr. Ahmed, was that the United States is continuing to be the puppet master for the Arab world. Do you agree?
I'm afraid I don't. I think that so much has happened in the region that the region itself has become proactive in defense of its own interests. Very often I have sensed that the Americans have now got into the back burner. They no longer are interested in a military intervention. For instance, they have seen the kind of disasters that have visited various nations after they intervened, say, for example, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. They have also talked much more about responsibility sharing. And I think that they want to be much more constructive in their approach. What you are seeing now is a certain independent line of action that is being pursued by the Saudis and their GCC colleagues and the Egyptians and the Turks who are broadly engaged with them today. So you are seeing an attempt to redress the balance of power that collapsed a few years ago.
Mr. Awad, you talked about America bombing, drone attacks. Obama has been known for his drone attacks as a major element of his foreign policy. To what extent can America actually alter the situation on the ground, particularly discipline the group like the ISIS just with air attacks and drone attacks, as it has tried to do in the past? Some argue somewhat successfully, but the ISIS is still a major threat that has emerged, to my understanding, from the power play of the Syrian conflict.
Well, I would agree with you and Ambassador Ahmed in two issues. Here is the emergence of ISIS actually is based because of the culminations of the 10 years of invasion of Iraq, that they have really nurtured all the hard elements and radical elements within the Iraqi society that led to this birth of this. If you go to the Central Intelligence Council of the United States, they have come with a project called Khalifa 2020, which is now available online. It's a classified document. It's a clearly indicate that the American knew what they were going to do in Iraq. So what happened in Iraq, it was because al-Qaeda in Yemen, al-Qaeda in Afghanistan shifted along with the American to Iraq, and Mus'ab al-Zarqawi founded this one into it. So therefore, when they founded al-Qaeda, they sent some good feelers to Syria, and they start taking the advantage of the situation there, and then they created al-Qaeda, where Jabhat al-Nusra was their party to it. And then when they asked them for loyalty, they said, no, we cannot give you loyalty, we are independent. Now the interfighting started. The American military doctrine have changed. If you look at the American doctrine, before it is the best war you win, the war you don't lose a soldier. Now they don't put footholds on the ground. A, and B, it is much better now because you have Sheikh Doom who is paying for you the bills, so you don't have to lose. So the arm industry is flourishing, Arab killing each other. We don't have the vision of seeing beyond our nose. The Arab leaders, unfortunately, till date, are unable to have a strategic thinking of what is the danger of the region. So interfighting within the Arabs, within the Arab and the region, it is a part of a strategy to continue the instability in the part of the Arab world, and then recolonizing in different way that these part of the world cannot rule themselves. And unless and until we take the blame fully on this and address our issues, we will be always a failure because they will take advantage of our situation. All our resources has been drained and taken out. None of them has been into the development. Then what next?
Mr. Ahmed, ISIS and its implications for India and South Asia. One. The second, I'd like your views also on the ongoing instability in the Arab world and how it impacts on the large Indian population that is based in a number of Arab countries, as we've seen with the rescue operations that have just happened. You've yourself been involved in one or two earlier clandestine rescue operations. So can you give us your view that what are the challenges that the Indian government faces, reference ISIS and the instability in the Arab world?
My own understanding is that ISIS is largely an Arab phenomenon. It has not manifested any interest in having a global profile, unlike al-Qaeda. Indeed, I personally believe that its core interest is in Iraq. It is also seeking territory in Syria, but it has not shown any serious robustness with regard to regime change. So I think ISIS is a very attractive movement for a large number of disaffected Arabs, both within the Arab world and in the diaspora. Its implications for the rest of the world, including South Asia, is, I think, minimal. It is minimal, And I don't believe that we need to get terribly alarmed in India. The role I would suggest is to promote security and stability in the region, along with partners of Asia, other countries of Asia. We have a direct stake in regard to the energy security of our country, our economic ties, the presence of our community. There is no way any government in the world can evacuate 8 million people whom we have in the GCC. Are we going to suggest that therefore we can be complacent about what is going on? The main concern that India has is prevention. How do you prevent a fire that is across the region from spreading and destabilizing a region with which we have a long-term abiding interest? So I think that here is an opening, and there is an opening for a major diplomatic effort to be mounted by the various Asian countries, and India can play a major role in this because we have excellent ties with the major countries of this region. And
As it has shown in some of the flashes of initiatives in the evacuation effort in Yemen. However, as you've rightly brought out, 8 million Indians in the Arab world, if you have to evacuate it tomorrow, if there are mushroom clouds emerging there, is obviously going to be impossible. But Mr. Awad, I want your take on two issues. One is the al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula is far more lethal than the al-Qaeda core that is operating out of Pakistan. And therefore, to what extent, the point Mr. Ahmed makes, can al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula be a challenge to the ISIS? And the second point is Pakistan in itself dragging its feet and not delivering on the expectations of the Saudis and others, where Pakistan has claimed to be very much a West Arab, West Asia looking country in a larger strategic role, but it has failed to deliver now because of the sectarian divide that exists within Pakistan. So what are your take on these 2 points?
I think, first of all, we have to explain to the people that there is no difference between IS and al-Qaeda. This is just an application method, the modus operandi. It is the same ideology which they have implemented. The al-Qaeda was not interested in territorial, as Ambassador said. Yes, IS is the ultimatum. So any country, and I'm still repeating this again and again, you can academically argue with me, any country based on ideology is doomed to exist. There's no question that you can, even IS is a failed state before it is born. It's a phenomena which will die in its own after the creation, after the destruction of the region, it will die. With us or without us, it will go off. The second part, which is more important, is that al-Qaeda is spreading now. It is from Tora Bora to Morocco. So all this region is going to be a volatile instability, and India, yes, has to be concerned very much about what's going to be the proactive movement by India. Contingency plan is needed anytime, because Yemen is a very small fractions of what Indian available there. 17 million Indian annually are there. So therefore, this is very important. Pakistan, at the other hand, it is much in a danger really to go, because what the Saudis are asking, 70% of the military of Pakistani Sunnis should join, not the other 30%. That is by itself a clear indication that you are heading for a domestic problem. So al-Qaeda activity, whether it is in South Asia or in the Arab world or in the Middle East, Northern African state, is the same coin, which is different faces of the people. Instability is the main problem, and I think it has to be fought together. There is no good Taliban or bad Taliban. There is no good Al-Qaeda or bad Al-Qaeda. Terrorist is a terrorist, and all of us has to join hand in fighting together. Otherwise, nobody can fight in isolation.
Right. Very important points have emerged. In conclusion, all we can probably sum up to say is that the sectarian divide in the Arab world, which we are reading about, is largely overstated, overplayed. The United States is not quite the puppet master that the world thinks that the US is. It's obviously got an agenda, and to what extent the Saudis are taking the agenda out of the US's hands will be seen in the coming weeks. Equally important is the fact that the ISIS, more than the rest of the world, is attractive for disillusioned Arabs who are looking to ISIS as a kind of an intellectual leadership, but ISIS, before it has found its feet, is beginning to fail all over. Unlike the Al-Qaeda, which has a much wider spread from Tora Bora to Morocco, and is a philosophy which tends to gel more with many radical Muslims. Most importantly, the threat to India from Al-Qaeda or ISIS is largely overplayed, and India is pretty much in good, safe hands but India could continue to play a very important role in the Arab world. Here is a diplomatic opportunity for India to make partnerships with other countries with vested interests in the Arab world and make a coalition of security, strategic and relationship providers in the Arab world, which India up to now has not taken up too seriously. With that, we wish to thank you both, sir, for your very, very deep insights into the state of affairs in the Arab world. And that's all in this episode of Latitude. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, goodbye.